Am I on? Can you hear me? No? Yes? Now? Thank you. Can I have my PowerPoint up, please? Namaste, everyone. My name is Sunitha, and I just want to take a moment of personal privilege and thank you for your hospitality, for inviting these songs and stories, and for this amazing partnership that we see with congregations, synods, and the church-wide. And this collaboration is a fruit of that partnership, so thank you. Is it up? That is not my PowerPoint. Okay, here it is. Accompaniment. We just heard Raphael talk about accompaniment. And when I think about accompaniment or mission, I often look at this definition, right? Walking together. It's about God walking with us, and therefore we walking with one another. There are so many shifting things that are happening in our world right now. Raphael often describes that it feels like the world is descending on us. Doesn't it feel that way? In our schools, in our grocery stores, in our context, it feels like the world is descending on us. We no longer live in a bubble. So we are almost forced to come in contact with one another. I wear some jeans. You try out some Indian clothes. I try out some fries. You may try out some curry. So this is the new context of mission that we're being called into. And accompaniment is a way and how we are engaging in this new context. Accompaniment is walking together in solidarity that practices interdependence and mutuality. In this walk, gifts are received and given. Expertise is received and given. Advice is received and given. Admonition is also received and given. And so, which you can take any era, any time. When you're talking about mission, you're usually talking about these three stories, right? God's story, my story, and your story. And it's just not just about human beings, it's also about creation. It's the story of creation, of environments, of the little bitty animals and the trees and flowers, and everything is part of this narrative and story. And as Raphael said, usually there is a line that gets drawn between my story and your story. What are the different ways that this line is drawn? Some of the ways that you think I would draw a line between my story and your story. Culture. Don't be shy now. That's why I'm here right up and personal. Culture. Age. Could age be a way that we draw a line between my story and your story? Language. Thank you. Economics. Thank you for saying that. Socioeconomic is a very big line. Race is one. Gender is one. And you know, if we start talking about it, we can name the ways that we draw the line like that, because we all know how we do that. So I would like to take some time this morning to talk about how can we navigate this line, you know, in the context that we're living in, the challenges that we're facing. How can we start engaging one another when these differences are real? And today I would like to talk about the culture, the other that's different from me, the way that someone said here that we draw the line as culture. I'm culturally different from you, you're culturally different from me, and how we draw the line and how we can engage one another across that culture. But I use this as an entry point to think of other ways that we draw that line, because someone mentioned here about the socioeconomic one, which will be a big thing in your synod as you're thinking about hunger, right? As you're thinking about food security. And then that's the socioeconomic line. So let's see what we come up together this morning. So what is culture? Everyone has one, right? I have one, you have one, your next door neighbor has one too. So culture is not just something that happens over there, you know, somewhere in India. It happens right here, right? Minnesota has a culture of its own, doesn't it? And we were in Texas doing this event, and Texas has a culture, let me tell you that. So culture is everywhere. So if you look at Google, the educational institution of our time, you'll get many definitions about what culture is, because there's many, many ways that you can define culture. Here's one of them. Shared, learned, symbolic system of values, beliefs, attitudes that shape and influence our perception and behavior, an abstract mental blueprint or mental code. This can be a lot of words, but when I think about culture, I say, what can it mean? And what it means is, for me, I imagine that a group of people came together and they looked at the environment, they looked at the sky, they looked at their land, they looked at one another and asked the question, what does this mean and how do we do life? And boom, culture was born. So culture can be the glasses that we wear. They're sitting right on the tip of our noses. It's the glasses through which we see. It gives meaning to the things that we see. It gives color to the things that we see. It shapes the things that we see. Now, the tricky thing about these glasses is that you cannot take them off. You can't take them off. I also have an image of a motherboard up on the screen. Culture is something that is wired within us. Sometimes we don't even know that we're wired, A motherboard, what does a motherboard do in a computer? So when you press a button, it tells the computer what to do. So culture is your wiring that might give you some buttons that I can push. And so it's so deeply wired within us. Is it a stereotypical thing that an Indian is talking about computers to you? Why is culture important? There are many, many reasons of why culture is important. It acts as a filter. I talked about how culture is like glasses that you wear, that it shapes the things that you see. It not only puts certain things in clarity, but it also blurs certain things. You have blind spots because of where you were born. And I'll give you specific examples of that. So it creates a filter. And because it creates a filter, it also influences your values. It influences your values, and it impacts how you see the world. And I will give you specific examples as we're going through this presentation. Here are some of the characteristics of culture. Culture is, there's a big debate about whether culture is nurture or nature. Have you heard of this debate? Is it nurture or nature? I think it's a little bit of both. I think if there is an Indian baby that was born today, I would think that the baby would have a little leaning towards spicy food. What do you think? Culture's in your blood, But also I heard that when the Japanese do the tea ceremony, you can learn how to do the tea ceremony, but your body might not bend in the same way. It's a beautiful image of how culture is also in your blood and bones. But you learn it. When I was growing up, in India, we eat with our hands, with our fingers. And when I would reach out with my left hand, my mom would say, no, Chinna, we eat with our right hand. We eat this way. My mom ate that way, my sister ate that way, my uncle ate that way, my dad ate that way. So I learned it. They'd say, this is the way you dress. This is the way you walk. And so you're formed, something that is learned. It's taught by, and it's not a construct, it's not a social construct of one person. There's many Indian people that don't like spicy food that much, actually. Most of them do, but there's a preference. But culture is usually shared by a large group of people. It's shared. It's not a individual preference. And so usually when you go into a culture, when you do something right, you'll hear the applause. Yay! Good for you. And when you do something wrong, you'll hear the boos. And when I came to the United States first, when I would stand in front of people and I would appear to be a very articulate and sort of independent woman, I can hear the cheers. Yay, Sunitha, way to go! But I wonder if I put a headscarf on my head and look very submissive, what would I hear? You see? So cultures kind of applaud and say different things, underneath the surface. And so it's patterned, it's repeated over and over and over again till it is internalized. And culture shows up as values, It shows up as symbols. Usually one of the, when you see cars that have bumper stickers on them, usually you can tell where that person's values are, right? So culture is like that. If you watch, and they pop up like proverbs or sayings. Bishop Steve this morning talked about pull yourself by the shows a value that you hold close in your culture. You see what I'm saying? And nowadays, you can tell whether what you hold close to your heart by watching commercials. We'll take a look at that as well. So this is one of my favorite images for culture, understanding culture. And as you go from this assembly, and as you share what happened in this assembly, this is a great tool to talk, to take with you. Culture is like an iceberg. If I say culture is like an iceberg, what would be at the tip of the iceberg? Come on, share with me. I'm making this up as I go as well. What's at the tip of the iceberg? If culture is like an iceberg, what could be? Food. What do you see when I stand in front of you? Dress. Let's say it. Color. That's it. Things that you see. So let's take a look at a couple of examples that would be dress. You said this, literature, games, fine arts, cooking. And when I think about what's at the tip of the iceberg, they're usually things that are to do with the senses. Those of you who had the privilege of traveling around the world, that's what, like when you go into a different place, what is the first thing? It's things that you hear, things that you smell, things that you see, things that, touch your skin, the heat or the cold. These are the things at the tip of the iceberg. If that's at the tip of the iceberg, what could be under the water? Come on. Faith values, very good. Gender roles. Humor, what's funny? Attitudes, okay, let's take a look. Theory of disease, relationship to animals, notions of modestness, notions of leadership, arrangement of physical space, definition of sin, concept of justice, courtship practices. Whoa, it's complicated. Let's take another look at that. Usually, what I say is that what's under the water gives meaning to the things that are at the tip of the iceberg. What's under the water gives value to the things that are at the tip of the iceberg. What's under the water gives meaning and values to the tip of the iceberg. Let's take a couple of examples. Notions of modesty. So, if you haven't figured this out yet, but I'm originally from India. And then I grew up in a seminary. My dad taught at a seminary. And when people would visit us from the United States, we could tell they went through some sort of training because the women would wear long skirts, right? They would wear long skirts because I'm sure in their training they said, dressed modestly. And so, but we knew that they're not used to wearing long skirts because they would fan themselves all the time because it's so hot. And when they used to do that, I used to see a reaction with the community that I was living. They would, when they would lift the skirt up to fan a little bit, they'd be like, "What's that? She's showing her legs." So there used to be a reaction in the people that I was living with. And when I had this privilege of traveling to the United States, I have to be honest with you, when I first came here, I thought that you all didn't have any notions of modesty, because I did see movies, and all these commercials, and I thought people can wear bikinis, so I thought, what could be notions of modesty here? But I was wrong. Again, I had the privilege of working with youth and young adult ministry, and at these ELCA events, there's some dress code that's suggested to young women and girls and men as they come to these events. Besides the cleavage, do you know which other part of the body that they would advise young girls or women to cover as they come to these events? Midriff. They would say, cover your midriff. Now, this was really interesting to me, because have you ever seen an Indian woman wear a sari? It's 7 yards of fabric that we wrap around our bodies, but there's one part of the body that's exposed. The midriff. It's the same belly, but what it means is completely different. You see what I'm saying? What's at the tip of the iceberg means something completely different because of the value that we've given the belly. Now, you might be wondering, what is this woman talking about? She's talking about bellies and mission. Raphael tells this story. He talks about, a couple of years ago, one of the expressions of the ELCA went to an indigenous place, where the women there did not cover their upper parts of their body. So they decided to have a project. Do you know what that project was about? Bras. And so they decided to take up this project about bringing bras to this community. And so they sent these bras, and everything was going well. And they came back after 6 months to see whether the project was a success. And it was a success. Only the men were wearing them. So the men had the bras tied around their waist, and they were using the cups as cup holders. I share this story so that we can loosen up and we can laugh, but this is so true. And sometimes when we think of mission practices, we think that there are some things that are happening way then, right? This is not true. We do this all the time. We think about people we want to serve, and we look at things from the tip of the iceberg, and we think people know what we know what they need, right? Is this ringing any bells for you? And this translates over anyone that you consider another, whether it's different generations. We often think we know what young people need and want. We often think that we know what homeless people need and want. We often think we know what hungry people need and want. We often think we know what other people need in order to belong. And so this has a lot to do with mission. This has a lot to do with relationships. This has a lot to do with community. And if I had time, I would go into the conversation about, I talked about something that was not that threatening. I talked about notions of modesty. But I can talk about something that might push your buttons, which would be arranged marriages. Because more than 98% of the Indian population still engage in arranged marriages. And when I ask the question, what do you think about arranged marriages, I'll hear, answers and responses back. They'll say, where's the love? There's no choice. Women are property. Why would you, still continue to use this practice? And I would share about another perspective, about why we still have arranged marriages in India. And if we had time, we would really get into it, maybe some heated discussion around this. But there's a specific reason why there are different ways that we view and do life differently. Because sometimes we think that mission is a transfer of culture or national values. This is huge. Why do we talk about this? We talk about this because we think mission is about just transferring our values to other people. And I invite you to sit with that for a while and think about that. You see, this is your offering at good work here. Amazing media. I want to share a little bit more about arranged marriage. I know I just put that out as a teaser. And I usually say that just like notions of modesty kind of drift up to the surface at the tip of the iceberg, so does notions of love. Why arranged marriage versus dating comes up to the tip of the iceberg is that because there's this one significant difference between my iceberg and the iceberg of someone that might be formed in Minnesota. There's one significant difference between my iceberg and your iceberg. Do you know what it is? So let me give you another metaphor. If I was an onion and you were an onion, if I peel your onion, I would find the individual at the center, right? If you would peel my onion, who would you find at the center? Collective, community. 2/3 of the world has collectivism at their center and not individualism. I hope the silence is because you're seeing the strength of what this means and not because you're bored. So the way we view the world is significantly different. The way we view the world and what we value is significantly different. And usually these conversations don't come up. And that's why we have different ways that we go about doing life. So this image that you just saw here is that when we encounter otherness or diversity, our immediate reaction is not, yay, diversity. If anybody's telling you that, you're mistaken. Because remember what we talked about when I was growing up? My mother did not say, Chinna, there's 100 different ways of eating, and this happens to be one of them. What did she tell me? She said, Chinna, food tastes so much better if you eat with your fingers. And she said, this is a beautiful way to eat it. And this is a best way to eat it. Right? That's what my mom told me. So when we grow up and when we're formed in our culture becomes the norm, right? This is normal. Wearing a dress like this is normal. Wearing this is normal. Speaking in your language is normal. So when you grow up knowing that something is the norm, what happens when you encounter another norm? If I'm normal, you must be. And so there's a rub that happens. When my iceberg meets your iceberg, there's a rub that happens. And sometimes, God has given us amazing entry points, right? That we can eat together, that we can sing songs together, that we can exchange some cultural things that are not that, create that friction and rub. But when it comes to underneath the iceberg, there will be. There's no other way. There will be, because my norms are different from your norms. But what we should caution one another from is that doing that, where your iceberg superimposes itself on another iceberg. My father told me when I asked him, I said, "Where's the love and the choice in arranged marriage?" He asked me, "Tina, were you given a choice into which family you were born into?" I'm just checking. Then he asked me, "What sort of love is that?" He said, "Well, do you love your family?" And I said, and he said, "What sort of love is that?" And he said, "The way that we define love is different. It's like it's a love that comes by living life together. You go through the ups and downs, And if you ask people who have been married for a really long time, they'll tell you, right? About what keeps their marriage together. So it's the journey. So here the dating system is about protecting who? Or the marriage system is about protecting who? The individual. And so in societies that are collectivist, who are they trying to protect? The community. Does this make sense? Give me a yes or a no. I need to. Yes, thank you. So what we value is completely different from what someone else values, and therefore. And so usually what we're doing is we're trying to judge one another from the tip of the iceberg, right? So here are some thoughts for the day. I'm rushing through this presentation to get so we all, whether you're Indian, Ethiopian, Tanzanian, from the culture here, we all think our culture is the norm. And so something that I'd like to place a flag on is that our usual response when we encounter diversity or otherness, the first emotion that we get is judgment. So watch that. There's something that I'd like you to take away from this session is when you feel judgment coming up inside, opt for another emotion, or curiosity. Judgment will come up as soon as you encounter otherness. And this is going to be a big one. I encountered a lot of people here in the United States who think that they are objective, that they don't have glasses on the tip of their nose. I'm sorry to break it to you, you are not objective. We are all biased. And that is something to watch out for. And then something else that we need to watch out for, especially, and I include myself here, as we live in the United States, we have power behind our worldview. Does this make sense? Yes. In the world, we have power behind our values. And so we have the power to impose, to be cognizant of that. Now, this is where things get tricky. So I grew up in a culture that's a minority culture here, where explicitly or implicitly you're told that you haven't evolved enough. So if you're eating with your hands, you haven't evolved enough. So if you haven't encountered dating system, you haven't evolved enough. So if you don't speak English, you haven't evolved enough. So this is something to watch for, because social Darwinism is well and ticking. And this shows up a lot in our mission conversations. How much time do I have? Okay. I think I'm almost done. So what is your worldview? I'm going to give you a couple of things to chew on and finish my presentation today. So what is the glasses that you might be wearing? Of course, I'm making broad generalizations and everything as we're doing this. I'm just trying to start some conversation around culture, if that's okay. So here's different ways, and things are, depending whether you're individualistic or collectivistic, there are different things that come up as values. You know, search for identity, equality, all these things, choice and freedom, they come up in individualistic societies, and collectivism, different things come up. But you usually have a positive response to change. You know, you're a relatively young culture, and so you're really usually open to change. Though you might not think that you're open to change, especially in our churches, right? We think, oh my goodness, we're not ready to change anything. Relatively, you're different from ancient cultures like China or India. This is how we understand change.
What this organization desperately needs is change.
Easily erasable. Camlin whiteboard markers.
You see what I'm saying? Commercials really, the market really knows what's underneath the iceberg to get you to change your behavior at the tip of the iceberg. So if you want to really get to know cultures, I watch your commercials all the time. View of natural world. Your view of natural world is different from the view of natural world of others. And there's nothing unnatural about the natural world. Again, when you see these leanings or values, you can see some of the strength that your culture brings to the world, and you can also see the shadow side of that culture as well. So, you know, everything should be explored. You know, there are many inventions that came about because of this curiosity, but not all cultures or groups think that you should dabble with nature. Perception on activity, this is a big thing. The work ethic, right? It is a good Protestant work ethic that is part of your culture, and that's why individualism, you know, shows up in the saying, pull yourself by the bootstraps, like we were talking about. The work ethic is, it's a big value, and so that creeps into mission too. You know, so if you're going on a mission trip and you want somebody to fundraise, what's the first question that they'll ask you? What is it that you're going to do? Right? And when we come in and talk about accompaniment and talk about relationships, it's a very counterculture because relationships are viewed as passive. Sound, please.
Shanti, come and meet your husband. Say hello to Raju.
What's the tagline you saw at the end of that commercial? Get used to choice. So I think cultures are like mirrors onto one another. They can be mirrors or windows onto one another. You know, they can show you, your culture, a mirror, and show you what's missing in your culture. Or they can be windows into totally different worlds, different ways of being, and different ways of viewing the church, different values and meanings. And so here's a mirror that's standing for the Indian community. They're like, maybe you should explore this value of choice. Not throw the individual under the bus so much. And Indians have to wrestle with that. But what happens when a culture comes and stands in front of your culture today? How are you responding? Will you allow it to be a mirror to you? Will you allow it to be a window to you? Or will you still interact with it from the tip of the iceberg? Are you willing to take that journey? Which is going to cause some rub. I always say you can't go around the cross, right? Not my PowerPoint. Okay. Oh, come on. So I don't know about you. Here are my ending thoughts. I don't know about you, but sometimes I look at myself and I wonder whether I go through life trying to self-verify myself. I hang out with people who will say, yeah, you got it right. You have life figured out. You have the right values, the right theology. Sound familiar? You know how you lose all your energy when you're hanging out with a politically other? And so sometimes I think I just go on this journey trying to verify myself, verify the way that I figured out how I do life, instead of resting in God's identity and God's justification. That I don't have to look at my belly button. That I can rest in God's identity. And then I can walk through this journey and engage others, learn from others, walk alongside with others, share my witness and story, but also be open to the witness and story of someone else. That it is not about me saying God is on my side of the story, I am right, listen to me. I'm willing to wrestle, willing to walk alongside, willing to celebrate, willing to receive, willing to give. A question before us, like I said, the world is descending on us, right? There is no global, there's no local. I'm sorry, that false line has already disappeared. We as a faith community are just trying to catch up, actually. That reality is here and right now. So ask yourself, do you view diversity as a liability or an asset? Well, ask yourself, what does the scripture say about diversity? Do you view diversity as an asset or a liability? Now, I can give you a 4-hour lecture on cross-cultural competencies. I can say, do this, do that, do this, do that. But in all of my experience in doing this, I found out that people that really walk alongside with other people is not because they've read a lot of books and have all this knowledge. It's not that. It's actually people who have a sense of empathy, who try to imagine themselves in other people's shoes. I found out that people that don't go first for judgment are great accompaniers. That one value that you might want to explore is a sense of empathy with anyone that you consider another. And I can promise you there will be great struggle as you try to come together with people that are different from you. There's great struggle. It's the biggest struggle. But you're either with the struggle or you're not. But there is amazing celebration And I hope that our local musicians, or the stories and songs that they share, is a beginning of that invitation into entering into the diversity. And you can feel it right here. So how hard it is for us to mouth those words, how hard it is to sing in a different way, how hard it is to receive. But it is the step towards moving into that diverse body of Christ that God is calling us into. And at the end, this is my favorite thing that Raphael actually says all the time. You know, that line will exist in different ways, because you cannot live in the reality that I was formed and brought up in, nor can I. You know, I can have a sense of empathy, but I cannot walk in your shoes, and you cannot walk in my shoes. But that dividing line we can never exclude on the basis of it, right? As a faith community. I cannot maybe hold your story, and you may not be able to hold my story, but God can. And we rest in that assurance. And at the end, I would like to leave you with a greeting from India. If you can indulge me and put your hands together and repeat after me. Namaste. 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 And what this means is, when my soul meets your soul, I greet the God within you. Namaste. When my iceberg is surely going to clash with your iceberg, I will greet the God within you. Namaste. I'm done.